Okay, so I've been thinking about a thing, and I'm gonna try to explain it. It's how slow is too slow. Cameras, TV, films, everything has a frame rate. It's how many images per second, frames per second. You get a camera, you're gonna shoot video, you ask your film buddy, who's a movie buff, what's the best frame rate? He's gonna say 24 frames per second because that's what movies are made in, 24 frames per second, at least since the talkies era. Before that, it was a little different. And you ask your TV buddy, and he's like, I don't know, 60i, which is interlaced, and you go, we're not doing that because we live in a world of progressive now. So interlaced is when frames do this, and progressive means frame, 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 frame. So 30 frames. Sweet, that's what TV is. And then you go and ask your sports buddy, because he loves watching the game in 60 frames per second to get that crispy, high motion, there's not a lot of blur, and also news does this. So, and then also his buddy who does slow motion, you got to do 60 frames per second so that way you can slow it down and it looks awesome when you're doing movements in slow motion. Yeah. There's a few movies that have come out that have done actual higher frame rate, 48 frames per second instead of 24. Think of The Hobbit and how weird that looked, and also that Will Smith movie where you can clearly see when it's the stunt man because you're seeing too much. Which I feel like was the big criticism of higher frame rate, is not only did it give people headaches for looking at something flashing that fast, but also it just, you can see the makeup, you can see the flaws, you can see the wires, I feel like. Whereas 24 frames per second, for some reason, it's just kind of like a sweet spot visually, or at least we understand that because that's how everything's been. But you go the other way too. Stop motion can go real slow. Think of the scenes from RoboCop or Gumby. What's the one with Wallace and Gromit? Chicken Run. Stop motion doesn't tend to be 24 or 30 frames per second because that's just too many frames, and not only is it that much extra work, but it doesn't look that much better. You kind of want this jittery feel to it. It's like a real feel. So maybe there's a sweet spot for making movies and stuff that doesn't require 24 frames per second. That's what I'm getting at. So I've been experimenting with frame rates. We're gonna intercut me because I'm boring with a dog because he's adorable, and just see what we're looking at. So yeah, so we got 60 frames per second. He looks like he's popping out of the screen, but he's having a good time. So he's a very good boy. Here's 48 frames per second. I feel like it looks kind of like 60 frames per second, honestly. I don't see a huge difference. And yeah, he seems to be having a very good time with my little science experiment. And now we're getting weird. So here's 18 frames per second. I think it's definitely different. I think it's definitely weirder. I'm kind of into it. It doesn't look crazy, but you can definitely tell something's going on. It's kind of got sort of a weird thing going on. And here's 14. In hindsight, I should have done 16 because I feel like 16 is a more even number than 14 in the context of like 24, 30, 60. But yeah, here's 14. It's starting to look weird. He's starting to get real blurry. Also, it feels like we're missing some information, like he's moving too fast for us. Here's 12. 12 is, yeah, it's getting weird. I feel like I don't understand how stop motion pulls this off, because I feel like he looks too freaky, and it's like calling attention to itself because of how weird it looks. Here's 10. It's even crazier. Here's 8. I think we're way past the threshold of this making sense for a regular movie. I don't even know if this would count as like a dream. You could sell this as like a dream of an idea. Yeah. And then here's 5, just because this is the slowest my camera will go, and 5 looks ridiculous, and it's almost like a time lapse. I feel like if I sped it up enough, it should look like a time lapse. Yeah, so I feel like the sweet spot, if we're not doing 24, has got to be like 18 or probably 16. I feel like 14 or 12 is getting a little crazy, so maybe you'd have to find a good reason to do 12, but yeah, 16, 18 I feel like almost makes sense. But I did all this with the sort of the locked-in 180-degree rule, which is like the rule of thumb. You just lock it to 180 degrees. So whatever your frame rate is, just double it. That's gonna be your shutter speed. You'll notice that things got way darker when I went to like 48 or 60 frames per second, because then when I'm at 60, it's up to 120 frame shutter speed, which makes everything darker, which slow motion people will tell you all day. You need to add as much light as possible for slow motion, because there's just not enough time for the camera to capture information because the frame rate is so fast. And so yeah, logically, if every camera shoots at 180 degree shutter, which is basically twice the frame rate for the shutter speed, motion is going to appear the same if you have the frames lined up the same. So if you took a 60 frames per second and you slowed it down to 24 frames per second, in theory the motion blur would be the same as just regular 24 frames per second. That's the idea, at least. So I was thinking, what if we go the other way with that? What if we don't worry about motion blur in the context of speeding up or slowing down the footage, but just try to match the motion blur of 24 frames per second, which is 1/48 for shutter speed, and just do that for all of it, so proportionately. So this is 18 frames per second. I tried to hit 240 degrees shutter angle, but I could only get to 216 degrees with my camera, which gave me 1/30 at 18 frames per second. Weirdly, the 1/30 fixed the flicker, because again, 30 is a multiple of 60, so that's nice. I don't know, does this look like anything different? I feel like I'm getting away with something here, because this is, you know, 216 is not that far away from 180. You know, 1/36 versus 1/30, so it's not a huge difference. I do feel like this might be okay, and this is definitely going to help if you end up in a situation where your lights are flickering, which is almost always, because 1/30 works. So I guess hooray. Okay, here's 16 frames per second, and it's 270 degrees, so 1/21. I can't tell if there's a flicker, because I think 21 is related. No, there's definitely a flicker. I think I see a flicker in the curtains there. Yeah, I don't. Again, this was my theory was 16 frames per second is kind of the sweet spot if you're not doing 24. I don't hate this. It definitely looks different. It definitely looks weird. I feel like I'm kind of doing like a robot thing, or like, you know, you're playing the video game and you can tell the graphics card is chugging, the computer's chugging a little bit, but I don't hate it. Yeah, so this is 16 at, what did I say, 1/21. All right, now we're in weird territory. This is 14 frames per second. It should be a shutter angle of 309 degrees to get the equivalent of 180 degrees at 24 frames per second, but I can only get to 324 degrees, so 1/16. That's just what the camera let me do. So this looks insane. I feel like you see this footage and you've done something wrong with the camera. I feel like that's the vibe that I'm putting out there. I can't tell if it's flickering. I feel like it probably is. But yeah, so 14 frames per second, 1/16. Weird number. Weird number. Okay, so this looks insane, and I don't know why you would ever do this. I feel like you would only do this if you're gonna speed it up for like a time lapse. But this is 12 frames per second at 360 degree shutter. So basically every frame gets exactly one shutter actuation, I guess. Is that what actuation? Cycle? I don't know what you would call it, but basically it's 1-to-1, and it's as far as my camera will let me go as far as 360 degree shutter, because obviously normal is 180. You can go a little bit less than if you're trying to fix your flickering, or you can go a little bit more than if you're trying to fix your flickering. 360 is obviously the shutter is open the exact same amount of time as the frame opens, I guess. Does that make sense? The frame is captured. Mechanically, I think cameras are capable of this back in olden times with celluloid, but obviously a digital camera, that's kind of a made up thing anyway. But I don't know why it won't let me go past 360, but there it is. 12 frames per second, 1/12 shutter speed, so it's basically the opposite of 180 degrees. It looks insane. I just talking, just moving around. I feel like this is a crappy Zoom call, it's crappy Skype, and nobody wants that. So I could go lower. I could go to 10 and 8 frames, but I'd be locked at 360 degrees. So if I was at 10, I would be at 1/10, and if I was at 8, I'd be at 1/8 for shutter speed, and I think it would basically be this, except brighter and a little bit even creepier. So we're definitely in uncanny valley territory. I don't think it's worth it. At least looking at the monitor, it feels like 16 frames per second is about as slow as I'm comfortable going. But okay, I want to do one more thing before I come to a conclusion, and I think this is a dead end, but I'm going to do this for 18, 16, 14, and 12 frames per second, and that's just locking the shutter speed to 1/48, just like 24 frames per second. So camera wouldn't let me do 1/48. Turns out I was able to trick my camera into doing 18 frames per second at 1/48. So that's weird. You just got to find a number that lets you do 1/48 and then don't change it, and somehow the camera just stupidly decides that that's okay now. So here's 18 frames per second, 1/48. It's flickering, it's a bad look, it's weird motion artifacts. I don't like it, but yeah, moving on. Okay, so 16 frames per second, it would let me do 1/48, but I kind of had to trick my camera. I did toggle back and forth between shutter speed and shutter angle to get to it, but I got to it, 1/48. It's flickering, it's kind of dark. I don't think this is a useful thing at all, but I did it. So here is 14, I had to check 14 frames per second, 1/48. I'm not even sure the camera's telling the truth, honestly, but it's saying it's doing 48 shutter frame thing, 14 frames per second. I mean, this is a lost cause and it's flickering anyway, so there's no point, but I documenting my reality, I guess. Okay, 12 frames per second, 1/48. Yeah, I don't even know. You know what actually this reminds me of? A friend described this to me as being cross-faded. Does that make sense? Because you're kind of in stop motion, but it's also like hyper real, and then the colors are really pop. But other than that, I feel like this is a terrible look. It's a waste of everybody's time. But yeah, let's go back to a better combination of frame rate and shutter speed. I think 180 is probably the move. So let's go back to that. Okay, so what did we learn? Well, if you're not doing some sort of multiple relational, division of 60 or 120, it's gonna flicker. So right now we're at 18 frames per second at 30 frames, which is 216 degree shutter angle if you care. So a little past 180, but not that much. I think this kind of works. I don't hate this. I was looking at 16 and 15 frames, and it was too like robotic. I feel like this, unless you're really staring at, like, I don't know if I would do this for a whole 90-minute movie, because I feel like we're so used to 24, and our brains are set up and our eyes are set up to see 24 because we've been seeing it our whole lives, that seeing 18 I feel like might do the same thing as 48 frames, and Will Smith's gonna look like he's wearing a wig, and the hobbits are gonna look like they were painted with really thick paint. But yeah, I don't know. I think this is an interesting idea. I might do a few videos where I just use 18 frames per second at 1/30 and just see how it goes, because I don't hate this. It's going to be a little bit annoying to get it up on YouTube, because YouTube, I think the minimum frame rate has to be 24 frames per second. So the way to get around that is just do 24 or 25 or 30 or 60. I think YouTube goes up to 60 frames per second. Just do one of those numbers, and then just make sure that when you're editing, the actual frames is 18 frames per second. That's how I'm going to do it anyway. So my camera is going to think when I put this in the editor that everything is at 60 frames per second, and so I'm going to have to stretch out the clip, otherwise I'm going to talk really fast and move really fast. So when I stretch it out, it should look okay. It should look normal-ish. I don't know how SoundSync's going to go, so I'll put a note here. Ugh. Yeah, worthwhile experiment. I don't know. Yeah, if you want to turn your brain off, which is what I've been doing for my entire career, 24 frames per second, 180-degree shutter, which is 1/48 or 1/50 if you have a DSLR. I don't know. Good experiment, I guess. 18 frames per second gives you a little bit more light availability, especially if you're, cranking it down to 1/30 instead of 1/36, because double of 18 is 36, so you're getting a few extra frames of light exposure shutter-wise that way, but I don't know. Time will tell if I think this is a failed experiment, but as far as, showing off dog gymnastics at different frame rates, it's nice. I enjoyed it. He seemed to have a good time. Everybody has dog slow-mo. Here's dog fast-mo or dog stop-mo, I guess. Stop motion? Dog stop-mo-shun? Do you guys do different frame rates? I mean, a lot of cameras don't even do this anyway. I had to use my Blackmagic to get to the weird ones. But, as far as really weird environments, like trying to make the film look different, or needing a little bit of extra light, that's always been a trick that I use, is if you need a little bit of extra light, drop the shutter speed down a little bit. You just got to make sure that it's an integer of 60, otherwise things are going to flicker, unless you're outside. But yeah, so I'm very tired. I can see the deep in my eyes, but I hope this was worth somebody, because my brain's been noodling on it, and I guess this is the end of the adventure. My conclusion is, if you're gonna do this, 18 frames per second, 1/60, but probably just 24 frames per second, 1/48. Don't broke what ain't fixed, or whatever yeah. I gotta go to bed. Like, share, subscribe. Catch you next time.